the first thing that comes to my mind is seeing the headstone with our family name on it. So I guess, so to me, in a certain way, it embodies so much of the family's history, and the history, in a certain sense, of the Jewish people too, because my family lived a very important part of that history, at least in the 20th century. And so I just see those letters on this fairly large stone, and the first time I had seen it was actually at my father's funeral. And so it just really reverberates for me. There's the starkness of it, just those 5 letters of the name, and I guess the concreteness of it, the fact that it is engraved, something engraved in stone has a very powerful resonance too. Now, my father had a great deal of respect for literature, but he thought it should not, you should not want to base your life on that. You should have something solid, much more conventional. But he also, on the other hand, wanted to do, he always taught, he was a doctor, and he loved medicine. He really thought how could you want to do anything but this is so great? That in a way, what he bequeathed to me was the desire to make of your life something you love. And to make, the center part of your life something that you really are passionate about and love. So in a way, he encouraged me without almost, and despite himself. I had a love of language. Even though my parents, they spoke many languages, and English was their last language. My father spoke 7 languages, my mother spoke 6. But my mother particularly was very playful, even with English. She was very playful with language. So I always had a love of it. And then as I was exposed to literature more and more, my love of it just expanded. Ginsberg was the first person, I think, that comes to mind that I fell in love with as a writer on my own. As much as I loved his writing, my writing was nothing like his at all, actually. At that point, I didn't understand this at the time, but I was writing in a much more abstract manner. And he was very opposed to any kind of abstract writing. So the one thing, now this is the answer, was that the William Carlos Williams idea of no ideas but in things, and to write very concretely. And I began to love that type of poetry, and in terms of writing too, and I was quite resistant to reading other stuff that I found was abstract. For Amichai, it's, first of all, studying with him, I felt that he was a person that had real wisdom in his life. He was, just the things he would say, I was just so impressed with how wise he was. He incorporates, so many interesting observations, and there's a great playfulness in his language. There's a great, he also incorporates so much of the Jewish tradition in a way that I relate to, kind of a combination of respecting the tradition, knowing the tradition well, but also incorporating it into a very secular perspective too. And those 2 things are very strong forces within me. Philip Levine, what impressed me so much was how broad his taste was. See, that was the exact opposite of what I had experienced at Naropa. Alan had a very limited sense of what he appreciated. What he really esteemed was not that broad, whereas what Philip Levine appreciated was extremely broad. I wish I had as broad an appreciation as Levine did. I admire it greatly. Sometimes I feel like it's a little bit like playing pinball, which I played when I was a kid. There's a certain element where you just kind of get a feel for the machine. You're like there, you want to be ready, and you're just hoping that the ball comes to the flippers in the right way. And so there's the first part of it always is very associative for me, very associative. And then after a lot of associative work, then I'll go back and become the editor and keep working it, keep working, keep going back. So I just keep trying to get to that place. And actually the way I do it usually is during composition, I read everything out loud. I just keep reading it out loud, until I get to the next line. The rhythm is very important to me, what it sounds like. I guess I learned a long time ago, really from writing songs and songwriting workshops, where the phrase was, hit songs are not written, they're rewritten. And so getting into that process of rewriting became very important to me. Now it's second nature. I started Headstone when I was in the Malay colony for the arts, which was a long time ago. And I was working on it maybe the last week that I was there. It was a month-long residency. I knew that if I did not get the basic structure of this poem down before I left, it might not get done. This poem had been gestating for years in my emotional life, but I hadn't put a word down until I got there. I stayed up all night the last night there to make sure that I got the entire structure of the poem down. And then for the next year, I would go back to it and refine it and refine it. And then, over the years, I've still gone back and, and tinkered with it a little bit here and there. But the basic structure was written down over that last week that I was at the Malay colony. But I do recognize that poetry is not it's not extremely popular. It's not like popular music, where it's ubiquitous, but rather, it has a kind of select audience. But then again, so do my interest in Jewish mysticism. I had to come and recognize that has a select small audience too. And but to me, they are very comfortable with each other. And in fact, I think a lot of Kabbalistic literature or some biblical passages are very poetic in the way that they're constructed. So there's a certain love of language in all of those things. So there's a certain compatibility. That writing tells me what I'm thinking about. I just want to keep writing as much as I possibly can.